Somewhere in your bathroom cabinet right now, tucked between the cotton swabs and the antiseptic, is a small brown bottle of hydrogen peroxide. You likely bought it years ago for cleaning a scraped knee or disinfecting a small cut, and it has probably been sitting there ever since, gathering dust between the rare moments you remember it exists. What I am about to tell you will sound, at first, like one of those internet hacks that turns out to be too good to be true, but this one is genuinely different. This one is grounded in real chemistry, real horticulture, and decades of documented use by professional growers in commercial greenhouses across the world. That same $3 bottle of hydrogen peroxide, used correctly, will solve more gardening problems than most products you would buy specifically for the purpose. And it does it for almost no money, with no toxic residue, and without contributing a single harmful compound to your soil or your plant. Root rot, powdery mildew, black spot on roses, fungus gnats hovering around your houseplants, algae growing inside the rims of your terracotta pots, waterlogged soil that suffocates roots after heavy rain, seeds that refuse to germinate, bacterial contamination on your pruning shears, storm damage on a prized shrub. Every single one of those problems, and several more that we will get to, can be addressed effectively by the same inexpensive bottle of hydrogen peroxide sitting unused in your medicine cabinet. And the reason almost no gardener has ever been told this is the same reason gardeners are not told many useful things. The product is cheap, it cannot be patented, and there is no commercial incentive for anyone to advertise it to you. We are going to cover 3 things in this video. First, what hydrogen peroxide actually does to plants at the cellular level, because understanding the science is what separates a gardener who uses this correctly from one who damages their plants by accident. Second, the specific gardening problems hydrogen peroxide solves with practical real-world applications. And third, how to use it correctly, including the exact dilution ratios for each application, the timing that matters, and the mistakes that ruin everything. By the end, you will have a working knowledge of one of the most useful and least talked about tools in residential gardening. Let us begin. Hydrogen peroxide is one of the simplest molecules in everyday chemistry. The chemical formula is H2O2, which means it is essentially water with one additional oxygen atom attached. Plain water is H2O, 2 hydrogen atoms bonded to 1 oxygen atom. Hydrogen peroxide is the same structure with an extra oxygen, and that single additional atom is the reason this compound behaves so differently from ordinary water once it makes contact with plant tissue or soil. The defining property of hydrogen peroxide is its instability. The extra oxygen atom is loosely held to the rest of the molecule, and any kind of disturbance, including contact with organic material, exposure to light, contact with metal, or contact with natural enzymes present in plant tissue and soil microbes, causes the molecule to break apart. The breakdown produces 2 completely harmless substances, plain water and free oxygen. That is the entire chemical reaction. Whatever hydrogen peroxide touches, within minutes to hours, has been converted into water and the same oxygen molecule that fills your lungs every time you breathe. Now, here is where the gardening application becomes interesting. That brief period of breakdown, during which the free oxygen is being released and is highly reactive, is where all of the useful effects happen. The released oxygen does 2 things simultaneously, and the combination of these 2 effects is what makes hydrogen peroxide so genuinely valuable as a horticultural tool. The first effect is direct oxygenation. The free oxygen molecules become available to the plant root system, to the soil microbes, and to any plant tissue the hydrogen peroxide is contacting. Root systems in healthy soil require dissolved oxygen in the soil moisture in order to function properly. In compacted soil, In waterlogged soil after heavy rain, or in soil that has been overwatered, the available oxygen drops dramatically, and roots begin to suffocate. The visible symptoms of root oxygen deprivation include yellowing leaves, sudden wilting, slow growth, and eventually vulnerability to root rot fungi that thrive in low oxygen conditions. When you apply hydrogen peroxide to oxygen-starved soil, the breakdown releases fresh oxygen directly into the root zone, and the root system responds quickly. Recovery from waterlogging or compaction can be visibly noticeable within 24 to 48 hours. The second effect happening at the same time is oxidative damage to pathogen cells. Fungi, bacteria, and certain plant viruses all have cell walls and cell membranes that are vulnerable to oxidation. The free oxygen released during hydrogen peroxide breakdown is chemically aggressive, and it attacks these pathogen cell structures, rupturing them and effectively killing the organisms it contacts. Plant tissue is also affected by oxidation, but plant cells are larger, structurally more robust, and metabolically capable of dealing with brief oxidative stress. At the correct dilution, the hydrogen peroxide kills the pathogens while the plant tissue absorbs the exposure without damage. That selective effect, where harmful organisms are destroyed while beneficial host tissue survives, is what makes hydrogen peroxide a genuinely useful tool against fungal and bacterial plant diseases. There is one more property of hydrogen peroxide that deserves explicit mention because it sets the compound apart from nearly every other gardening chemistry. There is no residue. None. Because the only breakdown products are water and oxygen, both of which are normal components of the natural environment, hydrogen peroxide leaves nothing behind. It does not accumulate in soil over time. It does not contaminate runoff water. It does not poison soil microbes in lasting ways. It does not require waiting periods before you can eat the produce from a sprayed plant. It does not require protective equipment beyond ordinary gardening gloves and basic eye protection. From an environmental and safety standpoint, hydrogen peroxide is one of the cleanest chemistries available to home gardeners. This is exactly why commercial greenhouse growers, hydroponic operators, professional plant propagators, and ornamental nurseries have been using hydrogen peroxide quietly for decades. The compound solves a wide range of practical problems. It costs almost nothing, and it has essentially zero environmental footprint. The reason home gardeners have not been told this is not that the information is secret. It is simply that no major garden center can profitably sell you a product whose generic version costs $3 at the pharmacy. A brief note on the history is worth mentioning here because it puts the gardening application into context. Hydrogen peroxide was first isolated and identified as a distinct chemical compound in 1818 by the French chemist Louis-Jacques Thénard. Its use as an antiseptic, a disinfectant, and a sanitation agent has been established and documented continuously for over 200 years since then. The horticultural applications followed naturally from that history. Commercial nursery operators began using hydrogen peroxide for soil sterilization and pathogen control in the mid-20th century. Hydroponic systems, which depend on dissolved oxygen in the root zone, adopted hydrogen peroxide for oxygenation purposes shortly afterward. By the 1980s, hydrogen peroxide treatment was standard practice in commercial cut flower production across Europe and North America. None of this is experimental, novel, or unproven. It is established practice in professional horticulture that has simply never been translated into popular advice for home gardeners. That gap is what this video is filling. Once you understand the chemistry and the history, the rest of this video shows you exactly how to put hydrogen peroxide to work in your own garden. The specific problems hydrogen peroxide solves in residential gardening justify keeping a bottle of it dedicated to your garden tools. The first and most important use is the treatment of root rot. Root rot is one of the most common, most damaging, and most consistently misdiagnosed problems in residential gardening. The visible symptoms appear above ground: wilting leaves that do not respond to watering, yellowing foliage, stunted growth, and eventually the gradual decline of the entire plant. Most homeowners interpret these symptoms as a sign that the plant needs more water, and they water more frequently, which makes the actual problem worse. The cause is not below-ground drought, it is the opposite. Soil-borne fungi, particularly species in the Pythium and Phytophthora genera, have established themselves in waterlogged soil and are attacking the root system itself. Hydrogen peroxide addresses both halves of this problem in a single application. The oxygenation effect drives fresh oxygen into the suffocated soil, reviving the surviving healthy root tissue. The oxidation effect kills the fungal pathogens directly. For a serious root rot situation, mix 1 part standard 3% hydrogen peroxide with 3 parts water and pour the solution slowly into the soil around the base of the affected plant until the soil is saturated. Repeat the application every 3 to 4 days for 2 to 3 weeks. Most plants caught early in a root rot episode recover fully with this treatment, and the recovery is often visible within a week of the first application. The second major use is the treatment of fungal leaf diseases. Powdery mildew, the white powdery coating that appears on the upper surfaces of leaves on roses, cucumbers, squash, peonies, and dozens of other plants. Black spot, the dark circular lesions that ruin rose foliage every summer in humid climates. Downy mildew, leaf spot on tomatoes, botrytis, and gray mold on flowering plants. All of these fungal diseases respond to dilute hydrogen peroxide, applied as a foliar spray, because the same oxidation effect that kills root pathogens in soil also kills fungal cell structures on leaf surfaces. Mix 1 TBSP of standard 3% hydrogen peroxide per 1 cup of water for foliar applications. Apply with a clean spray bottle, covering both the upper and lower surfaces of every affected leaf. Spray in early morning or late evening, never in direct hot sunlight, because the combination of hydrogen peroxide on wet leaves under intense sun can cause minor leaf burn on sensitive species. Repeat the application every 5 to 7 days during active disease pressure. Most fungal infections show visible improvement within 2 to 3 applications. The third use, and one that is particularly valuable for indoor gardeners and houseplant enthusiasts, is the elimination of fungus gnats. Fungus gnats are the small, dark-flying insects that hover around the surface of houseplant soil and seem impossible to fully eliminate. The visible adults are only the surface of the problem. The actual damage is being done by larvae living in the upper layer of the potting soil, feeding on plant roots and on the fungal threads in the soil. Standard fungus gnat treatments target the adult insects, but leave the larvae intact, which is exactly why the problem keeps coming back. Mix 1 part 3% hydrogen peroxide with 4 parts water and use it as a soil drench. Pour the diluted solution into the soil of every affected pot until it runs out the drainage holes. The hydrogen peroxide kills the gnat larvae in the upper soil layer directly through the oxidative effect, and a single treatment usually resolves the problem completely. For severe infestations, repeat once a week for 2 to 3 weeks. The larvae are eliminated. The adult population dies off naturally within a few days because no new generation is being produced, and the soil itself is left healthier from the oxygenation effect. The fourth use is improving seed germination. Many seeds have natural inhibitor compounds in their seed coats that slow or prevent germination until specific environmental conditions are met. These compounds protect the seeds from sprouting at the wrong time in nature, but they also slow germination when you are trying to start seeds intentionally. A brief soak in dilute hydrogen peroxide softens these inhibitors, oxygenates the seed coat, and triggers faster, more uniform germination. Mix 1 t/sp of 3% hydrogen peroxide per 1 cup of water. Place your seeds in the solution and let them soak for 30 minutes to 2 hours, depending on seed size and toughness. Larger, harder seeds, like beans, peas, squash, and morning glories, benefit from the longer end of the range. Smaller, more delicate seeds need only a brief soak. After soaking, rinse the seeds in plain water and plant them immediately. Germination rates typically improve significantly, and the timing becomes more uniform, which simplifies thinning and transplanting when the seedlings come up. The fifth use is restoring waterlogged or compacted soil. After heavy rain, after a stretch of poor drainage, or in soil that has become compacted over time, oxygen levels in the root zone drop, and plants suffer. Mix 1 cup of 3% hydrogen peroxide per 1 gallon of water and apply the solution as a soil drench around affected plants and across compacted bed areas. The oxygen release revives the root system within 24 to 48 hours, and beneficial soil microbes that depend on oxygen also recover. This application is particularly valuable for container plants after an accidental overwatering, where the limited soil volume makes it harder for waterlogged conditions to resolve on their own. The sixth use is sanitizing pruning tools between cuts. When you prune one plant and then immediately cut into another, you are potentially transmitting any virus, bacterial infection, or fungal spores from the first plant to the second. Most gardeners are unaware of this risk and never sanitize their tools. Professional growers and ornamental nursery workers always do. Keep a small spray bottle of full-strength 3% hydrogen peroxide near your tools and spray the blades briefly between cuts on different plants, or at minimum between plants in different species or families. Wipe with a clean rag. The hydrogen peroxide oxidizes any pathogen cells on the blade surface, and you eliminate one of the most common sources of unexplained plant disease in residential gardens. The seventh use is cleaning containers and pots between plantings. The inside surfaces of clay and plastic pots accumulate algae, mineral deposits, and pathogen residues over time. When you reuse a pot for a new plant, those accumulated organisms can attack the new planting before it has time to establish. Soak used pots in a solution of 1 part 3% hydrogen peroxide to 3 parts water for 30 minutes. Rinse with plain water. The pots come out completely sanitized, free of algae, free of pathogen residues, and ready for the next planting. This step alone significantly improves success rates with houseplant propagation and seed starting. The eighth use is the treatment of wounds and damage on living plants. When a storm breaks a branch on a prized shrub, when a deer strips bark from a young tree, when pruning leaves a large open cut, or when an animal causes damage to plant tissue, those open wounds are vulnerable to bacterial and fungal infection. Dab full-strength hydrogen peroxide directly onto the wound surface with a clean cotton swab or soft brush. The hydrogen peroxide sanitizes the exposed tissue without harming the surrounding healthy plant. Allow the wound to dry and heal naturally. This simple treatment dramatically reduces the rate of infection-related plant losses after physical damage events. The ninth use is the control of algae growth in water features, bird baths, and the trays underneath your potted plants. Anywhere standing water sits for more than a few days in proximity to plants or in plant-related infrastructure. Algae will eventually establish itself. The green, slimy buildup that appears in saucers beneath houseplants, the dark film that develops on the inside walls of bird baths and small fountains, the slimy coating that forms on the bottom of plant trays in greenhouses, all of these can be controlled with a small amount of dilute hydrogen peroxide added to the water itself. For a bird bath or small water feature, Add roughly 1 tsp of 3% hydrogen peroxide per gallon of water and refresh the dose weekly. The water stays clear, the algae cannot establish, and at this dilution, there is no harm to birds, pollinators, or surrounding plants. For greenhouse trays and saucers under houseplants, a similar light treatment after each watering keeps the surfaces clean and prevents the buildup that contributes to fungus gnat problems and root rot pressure. How to use hydrogen peroxide correctly is the difference between this working beautifully and damaging your plants. It comes down to a handful of specific details that almost no online article gets entirely right. The first detail is the product itself. Always use standard 3% hydrogen peroxide, the type sold at every pharmacy, grocery store, and supermarket for around $2 to $3 a bottle. It comes in a brown, opaque plastic bottle because hydrogen peroxide breaks down in light, and the dark bottle preserves the active concentration. 3% is the safe, effective concentration for nearly every gardening application. If you ever see a recipe online that calls for higher concentrations of hydrogen peroxide on plants, treat it with caution. There is a separate product called food-grade hydrogen peroxide available at 35% concentration. This is a vastly stronger chemistry that requires extreme dilution to be safe, and that can cause serious chemical burns to skin, eyes, and lungs if mishandled in its concentrated form. There is no scenario in which a home gardener needs to use 35% hydrogen peroxide for residential gardening purposes. The 3% pharmacy product is correct for every application in this video. Use that and avoid the higher concentrations entirely. The second detail is dilution ratios. Different applications require different dilutions, and using the wrong dilution is the most common reason this treatment damages plants. For a foliar spray on leaves, mix 1 teaspoon SP of 3% hydrogen peroxide per 1 cup of water. For a soil drench addressing root rot, mix 1 part hydrogen peroxide to 3 parts water. For a soil drench addressing fungus gnats, mix 1 part hydrogen peroxide to 4 parts water. For seed soaking, mix 1 tsp per 1 cup of water. For sanitizing pots, mix 1 part hydrogen peroxide to 3 parts water. For sanitizing pruning tools and treating wounds, use the product full strength directly from the bottle without any dilution at all. The third detail is timing of application. For foliar sprays on leaves, always apply in early morning or late evening, never in direct, hot, midday sun. The combination of hydrogen peroxide on wet leaves under intense sunlight can cause minor leaf scorch on sensitive species, like ferns, begonias, and some young vegetable plants. Cool, overcast days are fine. Hot, bright afternoons are not. For soil drenches, timing is more flexible because the hydrogen peroxide is below the soil surface where direct sun does not reach it, but cooler parts of the day are still generally preferable. The fourth detail is frequency of application. Foliar sprays should be applied no more than once per week, even during active disease pressure. More frequent application can stress the plant tissue and damage beneficial leafy surface microbes that contribute to overall plant health. Drenches for active root problems can be applied every 3 to 4 days during the treatment period, then suspended once the problem is resolved. Maintenance applications of any kind are usually unnecessary. Hydrogen peroxide is a problem-solving tool, not a routine treatment. The fifth detail is spot testing on sensitive plants. Some plant species and some specific cultivars are more sensitive to the oxidation effect than others. Before applying hydrogen peroxide as a foliar spray to a valuable or unfamiliar plant, test a small section of one leaf first. Spray the test area, wait 24 hours, and check for any signs of leaf damage, like browning, spotting, or dieback. If the leaf looks fine the next day, the rest of the plant can be treated safely. Ferns, succulents, certain orchids, and some tropical houseplants benefit particularly from this spot test step. The sixth detail is what not to combine. Hydrogen peroxide should not be applied on the same day as other plant treatments, particularly copper-based fungicides, sulfur-based fungicides, insecticidal soaps, or horticultural oils. The chemistry of those products can interact unpredictably with the oxidation reaction, sometimes producing leaf damage that neither product would cause on its own. If you are using both products in a treatment program, separate the applications by at least 3 to 4 days and apply the hydrogen peroxide first, then the other product. The seventh detail is storage. Hydrogen peroxide breaks down naturally over time, particularly when exposed to light and heat. Store the bottle in its original brown container in a cool, dark place with the cap tightly closed. An unopened bottle remains potent for 1 to 2 years. Once opened, it begins to lose strength gradually, and a bottle that has been sitting around for several years after opening may not be strong enough to deliver the full effect described in this video. If your hydrogen peroxide does not fizz noticeably when you pour a small amount onto a cut piece of plant material, the concentration has degraded too much, and it is time to buy a fresh bottle. And the eighth and final detail is what hydrogen peroxide cannot do. Hydrogen peroxide does not fertilize your plants. It does not address nutrient deficiencies. It does not control insect pests beyond the specific case of fungus gnats. It does not improve cold hardiness or drought tolerance. It does not substitute for sound watering practices, proper soil amendment, or appropriate light exposure. It is a targeted tool for a specific set of problems, and using it appropriately requires recognizing the difference between those problems and the broader range of gardening issues that need other solutions. That is the complete approach. Once you have integrated hydrogen peroxide into your regular gardening practice, you will notice something. Many of the problems that previously required expensive specialty products from the garden center are now being solved by a $3 bottle from the medicine cabinet. The cost savings over a single growing season is meaningful. The environmental benefit of replacing harsh chemical fungicides and synthetic treatments with a compound that breaks down into water and oxygen is meaningful. And the satisfaction of solving a real gardening problem with simple chemistry that you genuinely understand is one of the quiet pleasures of becoming a more knowledgeable gardener. If this story has changed the way you look at that dusty brown bottle in your cabinet, please subscribe and like the video. We are uncovering the horticultural secrets that have been hidden in plain sight for far too long. Let's grow a healthier future together. The next garden treasure will be revealed soon.